This is Here, the Happiest People on Earth, Chapter 10, titled The World Begins to Turn. In 1956, we chartered our first Canadian chapter up in Toronto. From then on, the word international in our title made more sense. Still, Canada and the USA are a pretty small slice of the world's surface. I kept thinking of the globe as I'd seen it turning before me that night in 1952. Millions of men on every continent looking upward, alive with love, waiting for the coming of their Lord. The decade of the 50s was almost over, and I couldn't see this happening. And then, when the opportunity came, I almost missed it. The invitation arrived in December 1959. Through CARE, the fellowship had sent aid to famine victims in the Republic of Haiti. Now came an invitation from President Francois Duvalier to hold 3 weeks of meetings in that country. From everything I know about Duvalier, I told the group at Clifton's cafeteria that Saturday, he's one of the most absolute dictators in the world. Torture, secret police, everyone there had heard a different story about Papa Doc. To go down there at the invitation of his government would be like saying we went along with all of that. It was Rose who challenged this. In your vision, Demos, were any parts of the world left out because of the government they had? I tried to recall. No. Every continent, every island had been packed with people shoulder to shoulder, lifeless and hopeless the first time, joyously alive the second. Political divisions didn't enter into it. Then I don't think they should enter into it now. The worse the political situation, the more people need to rely on the Spirit. And of course, Rose was right. So it happened that in February 1960, 25 men from the fellowship boarded a plane for Haiti. We didn't know that this first airlift was setting the pattern for the next 15 years. We only knew that each of us had somehow raised his plane fare, arranged to take his vacation in the winter, and my wife was counting on a trip this summer, and come back with the prayers of his home chapter. The aircraft had barely taxied to a stop at the Port-au-Prince airport when the forward door opened and in stepped a group of medaled and beribboned army officers. "Is Dr. Shakarian here?" said one of the group, who was apparently the interpreter. "I'm Demos Shakarian," I said, "but I'm just a dairy farmer, not—" "Welcome to Haiti, Dr. Shakarian. Your bags will be brought to the hotel. If you will come with us, please." Before the stares of the other passengers, we filed out of the plane and through a double column of soldiers at rigid attention. A rank of long black limousines was waiting for us. We never went near the customs hall for which we had filled out so many forms on the airplane. Under motorcycle escort, we went screaming through town to the Riviera Hotel. There, Senator Arthur Bonhomme, the Senate Majority Leader, was waiting to meet us. "Everything is ready for your meeting tonight," he told us in excellent English. Discovering that I was a dairyman, he offered to take me on a tour of the local cattle market. I was fascinated by the people we passed on the way, some leading cows or a single goat, the women balancing tall baskets of pineapples, lemons, even chickens effortlessly on their heads. But to my astonishment, when we reached the market, the animals were being butchered and sold right there on the fly-swarming square. "It's the drought," Senator Bonhomme explained. "The worst I can remember. We're having to butcher because there's no grass for them to eat." The Silvio Catto Stadium in Port-au-Prince holds 23,000, and when our group of 25 arrived at 7:30 that evening, it was nearly full. A large wooden stage, 20 feet wide by 60 feet long, had been set up for us in the center of the playing field. I would have been just as happy without so many military uniforms on the platform with us, but Senator Bonhomme assured us that the presence of generals and government officials gave the meeting status in the eyes of the people. We tried opening with some hymns, but soon found we had none in common, so we fell back on the staple of all fellowship meetings, individuals telling their stories. Once again, the businessman approach proved its value. Differences in theology, politics, race, they just never came up. As members of our group talked through interpreters about experiences common to all people, misunderstandings between friends, illness in a family, the struggle to make a living. The following night, every seat in the stadium was taken, and thousands were sitting on the grass on the playing field. The third night, Senator Bonhomme estimated the crowd at 35,000. Not all of them, however, had come to pray. The trouble started when Earl Prickett was speaking. Earl runs an industrial tank maintenance and pollution control business in New Jersey, but the story he told that night was about his personal battle with alcohol. It should have been a good one for this audience. Senator Bonhomme had told us that alcoholism was a major problem on the island. Earl described how he had started drinking with his customers because you'll lose business if you don't. Earl, however, was one of those who can't stop. His wife left him, his doctor told him he was endangering his life, but he was powerless over the habit. The noise in the auditorium was growing until Earl was having trouble being heard. At last, both my liver and my kidneys were so badly damaged, he said, that the doctor gave me 6 months to live. And at that point, he recalled, a friend had invited him to a breakfast meeting of the fellowship in the Broadwood Hotel in Philadelphia. That was the very hotel where the previous Wednesday night the bartender had told me to get out and never show my face in the place again. I leaned forward, straining to hear over the growing uproar. I'd been at that breakfast meeting, and I'd never forgotten Earl, in an immaculate white suit, stretched out on the floor, begging God for mercy. One of the interpreters bent down to me. Do you see those men, Dr. Shakarian? I looked where he pointed, and for the first time saw a file of red-robed, red-hooded men. There were perhaps 300 of them, marching slowly around the cinder track that circled the playing field, a number of people in ordinary clothes following after them. Voodoo priests, the interpreter said. They're trying to break up the meeting. Now I could make out a strange staccato chant rising above the hubbub of the crowd. Hundreds were streaming from the grandstands to join the eerie procession. The general at my right barked an order, and the soldiers standing behind him left the platform. What did he say? I asked the interpreter. He's told the troops to stand by. They can deal with this. No, he mustn't. I turned to the general. Don't call in soldiers, please. Through the interpreter, the general explained, if we don't stop them, I'll tell you what will happen. They'll keep circling till they've got a big enough crowd. Then they'll start shouting. You won't have any more meeting tonight. I looked to Senator Bonhomme for support, but he shrugged his shoulders. I don't know what else we can do. I knew the senator was thinking not only of the people at the stadium, but of the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands listening by radio in villages and mountain crossroads all over the island. We'd seen some of these hamlets on a drive into the mountains that afternoon. A radio loudspeaker hung from a tree or a house front, the only public entertainment through the long dark nights. Earl was attempting to describe the miraculous change that had begun in his life that Saturday morning, the reconciliation with his wife, the medically impossible healing of his body. It was useless. He stopped talking and turned to me for instructions. The snake line followed the hooded priests, had 1,000 or more people in it now, and was growing by the minute. And yet, if we used Hades' own strong-arm methods to protect the meeting, wouldn't we undo what we came for? We are here to demonstrate the power of the Lord, not the power of guns. Please, General, I begged. Wait, there's a better way. But as the 25 of us from the fellowship gathered hastily at the rear of the platform, I wished I knew what it was. Before those thousands of people watching to see what we would do, we formed a circle, locked hands across shoulders, and began to pray. After a while, I opened my eyes and stole a look at the stadium. The situation was getting worse. Now there must have been 2,000 marchers, and they were beginning to clap. The thinned-out crowd in the seats began to clap too, swaying back and forth in an ugly, pulsing way. The shouting started. I'm going to have to stop them, the general said. No, I said, not yet. I bowed my head again. Lord, this is your hour. Lord, save your meeting. From somewhere in the stands behind us came a scream. I whirled around, certain someone had been knifed. Soldiers ran across the field toward the sound. Then all of us saw a man and a woman, the man carrying a child in his arms, hurrying across the grass toward the platform. On the other side of the field, the marching was turning into a rhythmic dance. The couple reached the platform, and suddenly Senator Bonhomme strode to the rear of the stage and stooped down above them. In another minute he was back, holding in his arms a slender boy of maybe 8 or 9, who stared dazedly out of deep-sunk brown eyes. This boy, he said, I know him. He's from my district. I've known his family all my life. He looked from one of us to the other, literally shaking in his excitement. He can see. It was while you were speaking, he said to Earl. His eyes were opened. He can see. I still didn't understand. You mean he was blind? I said. The senator turned to me in exasperation. "Born blind," he said, "blind all his life until this moment." Still holding the lad in his arms, he almost ran with him to the microphone. At first he could not make himself heard above the din of chanting and clapping, but gradually, seeing the tall, familiar figure of the senator standing at the microphone with the child, some of the people quieted down. The interpreter was apparently too stunned by what had happened to translate for us a single word of what the senator was saying to the crowd. But before long, we all sensed a change in the mood of the stadium. Although the marching continued, the noise was definitely dying down. The clapping grew more scattered. All eyes were now riveted on the senator. An electric reaction was sweeping the stands. People had begun to weep. Here and there I saw hands raised to heaven. At last, even the red-robed priests stopped their chanting and stood about in confusion. The little boy, who was the center of all the thanksgiving, was peering solemnly about him, struggling a little in the senator's grip. What he made of his first look at the world I couldn't tell, but it was obvious that he was seeing, for his eyes rested first on one object, then another, returning especially to the bright ribbons on the general's uniforms. Every so often he would look up at the stadium lights above us, staring straight into them until the brilliance made him wince and whimper. His parents had climbed the stairs at the side of the platform and were standing now beside the senator. He turned and set the boy down between them. But I continued to stare out at the throng of worshipping people, shoulder to shoulder, heads raised in adoration. Where had I seen such a thing before? And then, of course, I remembered. When the senator stepped away from the microphone, we asked the interpreter to take his place and make a simple altar call. Would all who wanted to know this loving Jesus come down onto the field? Out of their seats they began to pour, hundreds upon hundreds. Many who had joined in the voodoo march also hurried to the center of the field. Soon the crowd spread from the foot of the platform in every direction. In 20 minutes, 5,000 people were gathered there. The next day, the stadium was packed by mid-afternoon. Again, thousands flocked onto the field when the call was given. There were more healings, some before our eyes on the platform, others elsewhere in the vast arena. The third night after the blind child was healed, we estimated that 10,000 people responded to the invitation to know Jesus. Many who could get close enough to the platform wept out confessions of sin, especially in the area of witchcraft and demon worship. All kinds of things were handed forward to the stage and left there. Balls of hair, bits of carved wood, little sacks containing bones and feathers. The sight that gladdened me the most in the ugly heap were hundreds of red-hooded robes. The next to last meeting was over. I stood at the window in my hotel room looking out at the moonlit bay, too exhausted and too exhilarated to go to bed. Exhilarated and worried. What had really happened at the meetings? A kind of mass hysteria, a mob reaction that could respond to voodoo chanting one minute, Christian evangelism the next, and could just as easily swing back the other way? What could these thousands know after 3 weeks of meetings of the reality of Christ? What would become of them now? I knew in theory that we would be leaving them in the all-powerful hands of God, but in fact my faith was not strong enough to believe that this was enough. Show me that it's real, Lord. Show me that something really happened. I noticed him clear across the terrace next morning. We were having breakfast on the broad outdoor veranda of the Riviera. Our group from the fellowship, Senator Bonhomme, and other government officials, a number of military men, the same group who'd been meeting every morning for breakfast and prayer. I was at a table with Senator Bonhomme and 6 other men when the waiter came smiling toward us. "Bonjour, messieurs," he said as he began to fill the coffee cups. It was the first time we'd heard him speak. A glum-faced fellow, he'd served us each morning in total silence. When he reached Senator Bonhomme's side, he spoke again, pressing his free hand over and over to his chest. "He says," Senator Bonhomme said, turning to the rest of us, "that this morning when he woke up, it was as if a heavy weight that had been pressing on him was gone." He'd been at the meeting the previous night, the senator continued to translate. He had not walked forward, but while we were praying for those who had, he said in his heart, "Jesus, if you are who these men say you are, I want to follow you." Seeing all eyes on him, the man set down the coffee pot. The senator continued to translate. "All my life, this weight has been there. Thoughts, terrible, evil thoughts. I was afraid of myself, afraid to go to sleep for the thoughts which came." The waiter was sobbing now. The senator interpreted his words. "This morning, when I opened my eyes, the weight was gone. It was like I was made of light, like I could float right up off the bed. There was no heaviness inside of me. Inside me. Someone else was crying. I turned to see a second waiter, tears streaming down his face too. The senator translated, "I know this light. I also have had those thoughts. 4 nights ago I came to the platform when they asked for those who wished new lives. Since then I have waited for the thoughts to come back, but they have not. My mind is the mind of a man and not a beast." It was my turn to dab at my tears as I whispered, "Lord Jesus, forgive me. Forgive me for doubting that you are strong enough." Later the same morning, word came that Dr. Duvalier would receive 3 of us at the presidential palace. One of the glistening limousines had been sent to transport us. An audience with the president usually lasts 5 minutes, said the official who met us at the gate. "I do not know when he will see you, but there is a room where you can wait." Inside, there are some 50 men sitting around a huge anteroom, many with attaché cases at their feet. We sat down prepared for a long wait, but to our surprise, the door to the president's office opened immediately and we were invited in. I don't know what I had expected a dictator to look like. Certainly not this stout little man with enormous round glasses who rose from behind his desk to greet us. In fluent English, he inquired if we had had a comfortable stay. We talked about the meetings, the huge turnouts, the hold of voodoo on the country. The 5 minutes stretched to 10, then 20. Dr. Duvalier asked a number of questions about cattle raising and milk processing in the United States. At the end of half an hour, he looked at his watch. "I would like to continue this conversation," he said, "but there are many people waiting." "Before we leave," I blurted out, "may we pray for your country and people here in this office?" All of us bowed our heads, Dr. Duvalier and his staff included. The 3 of us from the fellowship prayed aloud, asking God's blessing on the thousands who had attended the meetings, either in person or by radio, and on the new lives begun there. Then someone asked Dr. Duvalier if he had a special request he would like us to pray for. "Rain," he said instantly. "Ask God to give us rain." We glanced at each other a little unsurely. But again we bowed our heads. "Lord God, who has poured your Spirit out into thirsty hearts, send rain, we beseech you, on the thirsty land as well." The final meeting that evening was the most poorly attended of the entire time. The reason was simple enough. Nobody wanted to come out in the downpour.